I know we're kind of stretched for time, but I really wanted to make a point, kind of study a little bit about their so-called prophecy about Melchizedek and David, because the thing is, I was reading over the sermon books today, preparing for this, and I was seeing how, in the order of Melchizedek, they basically hang off of, 3 points. Basically, the 3 main points are, it is he's without father and mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days and end of life. And so they say because of these 3 points, Jesus, there's no way that he fulfilled the prophecy of Melchizedek. And Melchizedek has to be fulfilled by someone in the future. Well, again, Church of God members, I encourage you, read the whole book of Hebrews from beginning to end, and you'll see who Melchizedek was actually talking about. It wasn't talking about a foreshadowing of another priest coming in the order of Melchizedek. And see, one of the verses you guys use in the sermon is actually Hebrews chapter 5, verse 11. And you guys first mention about, Melchizedek and the Bible being a book of prophecy, so to study the prophecy of Melchizedek. Again, that's assuming that Melchizedek is a prophecy, because that's what you've been taught. Nowhere in the Bible does it say Melchizedek. There's a prophecy behind Melchizedek that has to be fulfilled. It was actually a foreshadowing of something that Jesus would do, but it wasn't a prophecy in itself per se. So they say, they'll go to a verse like Hebrews chapter 5, verse 11, where it says, we have much to say about this, but it is hard to make it clear to you because you no longer understand. The brothers even quoted this verse in the comment section. It says, in fact, though, by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, being still an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness, but solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. So they love this verse because they say through this verse, you see what Apostle Paul is saying is that he has much more to say about this Melchizedek, but it's not for them to understand because the church was in an infant stage. They were not mature yet. The mature, according to World Mission Society Church of God, appears in the last days when Second Coming Christ, when Second Coming Christ appears, that's when the mature will appear, who are going to be able to understand about the prophecy of Melchizedek that was so hard to understand 2,000 years ago. But when you actually read the chapter or read from the beginning or after that, you'll understand that was not Paul's point at all. And I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to you, but I kind of want to, we're going to go back to Hebrews, but I want to go to 1 Corinthians. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And then in verse 6, it says, we do, however, speak a message of wisdom among the what? Mature, but not the wisdom of this age or the rulers of this age who are coming to nothing. No, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. So the Bible clearly says there was the mature, right? Just in case they want to wordplay and say that, that there wasn't. That was not Paul's point. Paul's point is that, first of all, if you understand the context of the book of Hebrews, usually a lot of these letters are for kind of like a rebuke and an encouragement to the church. So there, in the book of Hebrews, there's a lot of issues going on with brothers and sisters that were still trying to hold to the law of Moses. So that's why Apostle Paul is explaining some of them are still not mature because they're still dealing with the concerns of baptism, the laying of hands, of not sinning. And he's saying, you should understand who Christ is. Christ being the most important thing, our high priest, our sacrificial lamb who takes away our sins. That's his point. So another thing that I want to bring up in the book of Hebrews is when they say, this is kind of, when I started looking into these things, it kind of amused me, because to the World Mission Society Church of God, and again, it was brought up in comments so that they know that this is not coming from me. Look at, you guys have the sermon book, and even the members that commented on comment section in our last video, they brought up about the order of Melchizedek being bread and wine. That's the order of Melchizedek. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, but that's what the church taught you, that the order of Melchizedek is, that it's the bread and wine. Because in Genesis 14, when Melchizedek is mentioned, there's not a lot of things mentioned about Melchizedek in the Bible. He appeared in Genesis 14 and I believe in Psalms 110. But in Genesis 14, when it's bringing up Melchizedek, it says he blesses Abraham, and then he brings out bread. So they say, this is the order of Melchizedek. And so they say, that's why second coming Christ, Ahnsahnghong, he's Melchizedek, because he's in the same order by doing what? Blessing us through bread and wine. Well, I would encourage you guys to do a little more studying on what Melchizedek and what was believed to be the order of Melchizedek and where that originated from. See, Melchizedek was a Gentile who was not from the genealogy of the Levitical priesthood. He did not come from Levi descent. The only ones that were able to be priests chosen by the people. Melchizedek was a Gentile. So because he was a Gentile, it was astonishing that he was a priest, but what's more astonishing is that he was king and priest. That's what the order of Melchizedek is that he was in the order of, he not only held the priesthood, but he was also a king. When you look at Jesus Christ, he was the what? He's king of Israel, the king of Jews, and he, according to Apostle Paul, he was also the what? High priest. And so when you understand these things, like for instance, when we go back to Hebrews chapter 7, it says in verse 1, this Melchizedek was king of Salem and a priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem means king of peace. So it didn't even mention bread and wine, right? It mentioned in the beginning of chapter 7, verse 1, that Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High, right? And it says he blessed Abraham. And then verse 3, this is the only verses the church uses to say that this was fulfilled by Ahnsahngong. It says, without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. The point is being a priest, remaining forever. That's the thing. And so when you see this, you see the butchering that the Church of God does. They have to put their own input to it. They say without father or mother means that he was born to unbelievers. Well, again, they're assuming that. They're adding that. This verse does not say that. For all we know, if this Melchizedek was, worshiping God, blessing Abraham, how do they know that his parents, didn't teach that to him? They have no idea. They're just assuming things, and they're trying to, again, in order to go from one verse to the next, where they get you is they have to add what, the fill in the blank part, and then you're just taking their word at it, and that's the thing is when you already be trust the group or trust an individual, you take everything they have to say as truth. But that's what I'm saying. Examine these things for yourself. Study the Bible. You're going to see without father and mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. First of all, Melchizedek didn't live forever because Apostle Paul called him a man, a human being. So what does he mean? It says that he remains It says, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. Not that he remained forever physically. We know Melchizedek died, but the priesthood didn't change. That order of king and priest didn't change. And what was astonishing is if we look at verse 6, it says, this man, however, well, let's read from verse 4. Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi, there it is, descendants of Levi, because they're the only ones that can be priests, who become, now the law requires the descendants of Levi who become priests to collect a tenth from the people, that is from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had promises. So when you think about this, what is he saying here? This genealogy is not the genealogy that the Church of God brings up. The Church of God says having genealogy means belonging to one of the 12 tribes of Israel. That's not true. Look up the definition of genealogy. It's tracing back one's lineage or bloodline, right? So Paul's point of saying that Melchizedek didn't have genealogy, his point was about him not coming from the bloodline of Aaron or the Levitical priesthood of Levi's tribe, and he was yet a priest. That was the astonishing thing. That's why this is being brought up, not because he physically didn't have a genealogy. That's absurd. He obviously was born through parents, right, who also had parents, so there was genealogy. Genealogy does not have anything to do with being part of the 12 tribes of Israel, but it's a tracing of one's bloodline. And again, Apostle Paul is focusing on the sole fact that this Melchizedek, what was so astonishing was that he was king and priest. He held the priesthood, an everlasting priesthood, and yet he did not come from the bloodline of Levi or Aaron. And what's amazing about that is, again, it tells you it resembles the Son of God being Jesus. In what way? Jesus didn't come from the order of, or from the bloodline of Levi or the bloodline of Aaron. Jesus came from the tribe of Judah. Priest didn't come from the tribe of Judah. He resembles Melchizedek in that way. Also, another thing that I encourage members, I've done my research. I encourage the members to do their own research. But another way to understand the part where it says that he has no beginning of days or ends of life, you have to understand that Apostle Paul, who we assume is the one who wrote the book of Hebrews, who had a profound understanding of the Old Testament, doctrine, or the Old Testament stories. When you read the Old Testament, it brings up, certain individuals. Mostly, it always gives you an account of their genealogy, their bloodline, who their parents were, when they were born, how long they lived, and when they died. So Apostle Paul, who understood these things, found it very curious that Melchizedek, in the book of Genesis 14, he only appeared once. It was a very short version of Melchizedek. It didn't come with genealogy. It didn't come with who his parents were, or how long he lived, or when he died. So in a sense, he's saying it's like what? He didn't have beginning of days, end of life. It's not documented. He didn't have genealogy. Resembling the Son of God, a foreshadowing. He's not speaking literally here. And so when you look at Paul's whole point in the book of Hebrews, when it's talking about Melchizedek and Jesus, it tells you, it says here in, let's see, in chapter 8, verse 1, he tells you, it says, now the main point of what we are saying is this. He's about to tell you the main point so that you don't have to be wondering what was his main point by mentioning that. Am I not the mature? Am I not this? Am I not that? Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1. Now the main point of what we are saying is this. We do have such a high priest who sat down at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heaven, and who serves in the sanctuary, the true tabernacle set up by the Lord, not by a mere human being. And it says here in verse 6, if we skip down to verse 6, but in fact, the ministry Jesus had received is superior to theirs, as the covenant of which he is a mediator is superior to the old one, since the new covenant is established on better promises. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will establish with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and will remember their sins no more. And again, this new covenant is based on better promises, because he's quoting David here, where it says, for I will forgive their wickedness and I will remember their sins no more. How did we obtain that? And when you read the book of Hebrews, it makes you understand it was through Jesus' work. When you read chapter 9 verse 11, it tells you the title, blood of Christ. But when Christ came as the high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not made with human hands, and that is to say, is not part of this creation. He did not enter the means of blood of goats or calves, but he entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. The blood of goats and bulls and ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them, so that they are outwardly clean. How much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God. So when you read this, it's constantly Hebrews is talking about God's sacrifice. In another part that, that's another thing about Melchizedek, is that, priests had to be chosen by their people. But Melchizedek was chosen by God. And Psalms chapter 110 refers to that. When you look at Jesus Christ wasn't chosen by the people to become king and priest. The Bible had already prophesied God's promise to his son was that he would reign on David's throne. So, my encouragement again is, we can obviously, go through this, more in depth another time, but I kind of want to give that answer because I want the members to know that I'm not running from any of the questions, and there's biblical truth out here, and you have to put your head in the books and study for yourself instead of taking somebody's word for it. Find out all this amazing truth in the scriptures right in front of you. And you guys want to add anything on Melchizedek before I jump to David?
I think that was like a mic drop.
That's what I was going to say. I was just going to say, boom.
I got nothing to add to that. I mean, yeah, it's just basically reading the context. Like, I mean, for me, I've never read the context. I just, followed what they said. And you made a really good point in the beginning where you said, they assume that Melchizedek is like a prophecy about second coming Christ, right, and that these are the points that he must fulfill. But it doesn't say that in the Bible. And then as you just demonstrated reading because they always showed, Hebrews 5, 11 through 13, and then Hebrews 7, 1 through 3, but you never read in or around it. And just reading around it, I mean, you can see clearly that is speaking about Jesus.